We're talking about Sterling Chemistry Lab in 100 years. The talk will be in four parts. First, about other Sterling buildings together with the Sterling Chemistry Lab and the bequest that made them possible. Second, about Sterling himself, his life and his interaction with the barons. Third, about Boltwood's building. Although the building was designed by Rockefeller's New York architects Delano and Aldrich, they didn't have it exactly the way we have it now, and that was because of Bertram Boltwood. For example, on the front of the building, they wanted to have knights and bishops, but Boltwood changed that. And finally, about problems, repair, and expansion over the last 60 or 70 years. So starting with Sterling buildings and the bequest. In 1638, New Haven was laid out in a tic-tac-toe board as a planned city. By the year 2000, there were these greater than two-story buildings in the area of Yale. So here we have Grove Street, Prospect Street, College Street, and extending to Congress Avenue. Sterling Chem Lab was built in 1923 at 225 Prospect Street. But what was before Sterling Chemistry Lab? If we go back 100 years or so, Yale had 6 schools that were small in 1900. First, there was Yale College. And chemistry there was in the Kent Chemistry Lab, called academic because it was part of the undergraduate curriculum. Built in 1887, you notice, just less than 40 years before Sterling. And in the chemistry library, or outside the chemistry laboratory, there's this plaque which remembers Alfred Kent, the meat packer from Chicago who built that Kent Chemistry Lab. Next to it on Library Street, where Jonathan Edwards College is now, is Sloan Physics Building, built 5 years earlier by carpet manufacturers from New York. That's where J. Willard Gibbs' office was. And this all fit in just a little more than one of the squares. But then there were other schools. There was the medical school, which was in a small establishment a little ways away on York Street. There was the Yale Law School, which in what is now Hendry Hall. There was the Yale Divinity School. And there was the Yale School of Fine Arts. But that's only 5 of the 6 schools. Science was a different independent school. The most important person probably in establishing the science school was John Addison Porter, although he was the 3rd chemistry professor in the School of Applied Sciences, which was strictly a non-college operation. He, as you can see from this stone that's in the lobby downstairs, died at the age of 44 and was a professor from 1852 to 1864. His principal accomplishment, perhaps, was that he married Josephine Earle Sheffield, who was the daughter of Joseph Earle Sheffield, who was a cotton canal and railway tycoon. He lived in this house on Hill House Avenue. His railroad ran through the property of his home. And on that property was built the Sheffield Scientific School for his son-in-law. He died in 1882, but a dozen years later, his legacy constructed the Sheffield Chemistry Laboratory. That's the only building from that period that survives on Prospect Street. Here we look from Canal Street and Trumbull Street down. And you see that this building that was built in 1894, although only the shell survives of the original, it was the inside was rebuilt for computer science. But in the original building, on the front steps is where they would take class pictures each spring. So here was the class in 1898 S. The S means Sheffield Scientific School, not connected with Yale College. So here in that class of 1898 S, we see Bertram Borden Boltwood, who was so important in the construction of Stirling Chemistry Lab, and Treat B. Johnson, who's been important in our department. So the Sheffield mansion was remodeled and then converted after the demise of the Sheffields into the Physiological Chemistry building just behind the Sheffield Scientific School. So it fits here at the corner of Grove and Prospect Street. In 1910, the widow of Russell Sage gave money to expand science even further north up Prospect Street. The first building to go there was Sloan Physics. The same Sloans who had given the physics building on Library Street 30 years earlier built another one for Yale in 1912 on the Pearson Sage Square. And in 1913, Osborne Biology was added. And then in 1923, the two chemistry departments, the academic department and the Sheffield Scientific School department, merged to come in the new Stirling Chemistry Laboratory. In 1924, the medical school moved to where it is now, and the physiological chemistry moved away from further away from chemistry, and is the reason that MB&B is now a separated department between the medical school and our region. In 1931, the law school moved. In 1933, the divinity school moved. Notice that all these dramatic changes happened within just one decade. Why was that? The cause was revealed in 1918 in the Science magazine, The Stirling Bequest to Yale University, which is said will amount to $15 million. In fact, ultimately, it was nearly $40 million. $1 million of that went to the Osborne Memorial Home. $4 million went to relatives, friends, employees, charities, but all the rest residue and remainder for the benefit of Yale University. And for the erection in New Haven, Connecticut, of at least one enduring, useful, and architecturally beautiful edifice, which will constitute a fitting memorial of my gratitude to and affection for my alma mater. The trustees shall have entire liberty and discretion to do other things like other fine and enduring buildings, scholarships and fellowships, and new professorships. So buildings, scholarships, fellowships, and professorships. And we'll go through these three things, the buildings first. So these are the Yale buildings that were built by John Stirling's bequest. The first one was Stirling Chemistry Lab, as we mentioned, in 1923. The second, in 1924, was the Stirling Hall of Medicine. The third was a very utilitarian one, the Stirling Powerhouse. And another utilitarian one, the Stirling Dormitory, which was not newly constructed. It was bought for nurses at the medical school. Then the biggest one, the Stirling Memorial Library in 1930. And the Stirling Law Buildings in 1931. And the Hall of Graduate Studies the next year in 1932. Then Stirling Tower, which is part of SSS, Sheffield, Stirling, Strathcona. The the tower was directly from the bequest, but he had a hand also in the Strathcona part, as you'll see later. He also had a hand earlier on, long before his bequest, 30 years earlier, in Osborne Hall, as we'll discuss. In this letter from Timothy Dwight, the president, to Stirling in 1890, he said, "Mrs. Osborne did us an ever to be remembered service, and her name will be held in high honor here." When you see another opportunity for securing a gift to Yale, lay hold upon it as lovingly as you did in the case of the Osborne gift. I hope your railroad on engineering gift, which you thought might be possible, may see the light at some time. Because Stirling had arranged for the widow, Miriam Osborne, for whom he was the executor, for he was her husband's executor, he had arranged for her to build that building for Yale, as we'll see. Then, after her death, the Osborne Memorial Laboratories was also arranged by Stirling. Then Trumbull College in 1933. And Stirling Divinity Quadrangle the same year. And finally, the Yale Medical Library in 1941. So the entire width of Yale in its New Haven manifestation was established by Stirling. So here are the Stirling buildings. In fact, if you stand here on York Street and look around 270 degrees, what you see is this. First, Morey's, which was not built by Stirling, but then the Hall of Graduate Studies, the powerhouse with its elegant smokestack, the law school, Stirling Memorial Library, and Trumbull College. Everything you can see of Yale there is built by Stirling. So the dormitory, which was sort of a secondary operation, was sold in 1957 to the medical school, so it doesn't exist anymore, nor does Osborne Hall exist anymore, as we will see. So this was Osborne Hall at the corner of Chapel and College Street. It was a promising building. The Harvard Crimson in 1889 said it will be one of the finest buildings belonging to the college, as well as the best equipped of its kind in the country. In every way, the building is as near perfection as it could possibly be made. On the other hand, locally it was unpopular, despite the enthusiasm of the Harvard Crimson and President Timothy Dwight. For one thing, it replaced the hallowed Yale fence where the undergraduates were accustomed to hanging out. In fact, in 1926, the Yale Daily News wrote, Osborne Hall was erected at a time when American architecture was suffering from growing pains and has never harmonized with any of the other Yale buildings. The visitor's first impression of Yale was derived from Osborne and was usually one of alarm. Many parts of the building had become useless for classroom purposes because it was impossible to hear a lecture or recitation in them because of trolleys on the street outside. So in 1926, it was destroyed. It was knocked down and Bingham Hall rose in its place. There's a memorial plaque on the front of Bingham Hall here, but it memorializes not Osborne Hall, but the Yale fence. Otherwise, 11 of the original 13 Stirling buildings survive and continue to function well after 83 to 111 years. Remember that the Kent Chemical Laboratory and the Sloan Physics Building lasted only about 30 years. Of course, there's been some modernization. But the far-sighted Stirling trustees designated a substantial endowment for maintenance of SCL's $2,818,753.49. 28% was for maintenance. So SCL had its own carpenter, its own plumber, and its own electrician, Ernie, Art, and Earl, in the 1960s to 1980s at the time that I came. Notice that the trustees have entire liberty and discretion, so we owe a lot to them, not only for the buildings, but also for scholarship and fellowships. The Sterling Fellowships, for example, 1933 to 1934, this young man got a Sterling Fellowship after being fired as research instructor by Brown University because of the Depression. He wasn't married, so all the single faculty members were let go. But because Yale had Sterling Fellowships available, he could be hired here, and he stayed. And 34 years later, when told he would be receiving the Nobel Prize, he asked, "What for?" Because it could have been for the reciprocal relations, and in fact it was, but it could equally well have been for his solution to the problem of the Ising lattice, which is also on this commemorative stamp and is also commemorated in the gate to the connecting the two buildings here. If we look at the hall outside the lecture room here, we see dark spots on the floor. And if you connect them, you see the outline of Onsager's office. And it was not only scholarships and fellowships that the trustees could arrange, also new professorships. The Sterling professorships, Yale's premier professorships. In the mid-1920s, when they were founded, there were 18 simultaneous professorships in all fields. But by 1958, it was increased to 27, and in 2011, it was increased to 40 simultaneous professorships. Since 1919, there have been 210 Sterling professors, including 13 in the chemistry department, plus 8 with joint chemistry appointments. So here's the committee that set up the dedication of the building 101 years ago. And Yale's very first Sterling professor in 1919 was the physical chemist shown here. He was chairman of the department as well as of the planning committee. He came to Yale from American Zinc and the Bureau of Mines that same year and became a Sterling professor in 1920. He was a Scotsman. His PhD was from St. Andrews. His wife was the chair of the Ladies' Entertainment Committee. He resigned just 4 years later to become the head of the research laboratory of the U.S. Steel Corporation. G.N. Lewis at that time wrote to the dean of the Sheffield Scientific School, "I'm horrified by the calamity that is overtaking the scientific departments of American universities, which will ultimately affect most deleteriously the industries themselves, this pirating of talent from the universities to the industries." The second Sterling professor was a physiological chemist, Lafayette B. Mendel, who had been a student in the Sheffield Scientific School and gotten his PhD there in 1893. He was in Sheffield Scientific School in the physiological chemistry department and then moved away from our chemistry to the medical school. So he was the first MB&B professor. He discovered essential components in nutrition, vitamins A and B, lysine, and tryptophan, and he was probably Yale's first Jewish professor. When Johnston was lured away, he was replaced as the 18th Sterling professor by another organic chemist. This was this man here, Treat B. Johnson, who was chair of the executive committee for the dedication of SCL. He got his BS from the scientific school in 1898 and his PhD in 1901. And ultimately worked on synthesis of uracil, cytosine, thymine, and hexyl resorcinol, which made him a fortune. Subsequent Stirling chemists are shown here in this list. Cyril Long replaced Lafayette B. Mendel, then Kirkwood replaced Johnston, and then more recently, Sid Altman, Sam Danishevsky, Fred Richards, Jerry Burson, Bob Schulman, Don Crothers, then Stites, Moore, Tully, Saul, Jorgensen, Rothman, Shepards, Pyle, Hamish, Schiffer, and most recently, Scott Miller this year. Now, who was John William Stirling? When he was born in Stratford, Connecticut in 1844, his prominent sea captain father had been already retired for 9 years. He inherited his mother's antipathy to the sea. Even ferries were, quote, distasteful to him. But he loved fishing, also rowing, boxing, riding, and working. He entered Yale from Stratford Academy 1860, the year this photograph was taken. He lived in South Middle, now called Connecticut Hall. He had some sense of humor, as you can see in this picture of college life, which he sent as a joke to his parents. He's the guy with his feet up on the table at the left. As a senior, he was in Skull and Bones and was Phi Beta Kappa. He was an orator at his 1864 commencement. And he stayed at Yale for another year to get an AM in history in 1865. Notice the year. This is, of course, the time of the Civil War, but his father bought him out of the Civil War, which was a standard thing to do at that time, to pay someone to take your place. He then went to Columbia Law School and wrote in his diary that day and night were spent in constant application, which resulted in his being the valedictorian of law school in 1867. And then he went on 6 years later to found Shearman and Stirling, together with Thomas Shearman, who was 10 years older than he. Shearman and Stirling continued for 151 years later this year, over 700 lawyers, but last week it became A&O Shearman. They dropped Stirling after all this time, the third largest law firm globally, 3,900 lawyers across 29 countries. This is ironic because the name they kept, Shearman was a courtroom advocate, but Stirling was a business advisor who appeared in court only twice as a young man. His skill was in advising business, which is, of course, one of the main efforts of these big law firms nowadays. He was said to have vigorous practical common sense and rare business sagacity. The great captains of industry and finance literally sat at his feet and unhesitatingly followed his advice. His clients included James Stillman, the head of Citibank, the largest in the U.S. at the time, William Rockefeller, oil and finance, Charles Osborne, that's the Osborne Lab and Osborne Lecture Hall, Wall Street speculator, Matthew Borden, a manufacturer in Rhode Island, and railroad barons that we're going to talk about. He invested as well, but he didn't speculate. He was on many boards, and this was before insider trading became a concern. He never returned to Yale for a reunion or any formal occasion. In 1893, he was given a honorary doctorate degree, but it was in absentia because he wasn't willing to come to Yale to receive it. Around the turn of the century, he was approached by the new Yale president, Arthur Twining Hadley, asking if he might be willing to contribute toward a project that Hadley had in mind. He said no, he didn't think so, but he was shepherding his money, and there would be money for Yale ultimately, and there was. it doubled Yale's resources. Here you see Wolsey Hall on the left there, and another building. What's this building? Right, it's SSS, Sheffield, Stirling, Strathcona. We've talked about Sheffield and Stirling, but who was Strathcona? Well, there's some hints here. Up at the top, there's a shield, which is this: a lion, a hammer and spike, and 4 guys in a canoe with a flag that says NW on it. And here, there's a railway engine, and all those little X's are not in fact X's. They're hammers and spikes. This relates to what Dwight had written to Stirling in 1890. I hope your railroad on engineering gift may see the light at some time. And this explains it. This stone is from Mount Sir Donald in the Selkirk Mountains of British Columbia, named to honor Sir Donald Smith, Lord Strathcona. So here's Baron Strathcona and Mount Royal, that's Montreal, 1820 to 1914. He came from Scotland to Canada at age 18 to search his fortune, starting in Hudson's Bay Company, where he became the main factor. Then the Northwest Company, that you remember is the NW flag with the 4 guys in the canoe. He started Canadian Banks, and most importantly, the Canadian Pacific Railway. Here he is driving the last spike into the railway, so that's the hammer and spike in 1885. This is in the district of Canada called the Yale Land District because he was connected through Stirling to Yale. He got an honorary degree at Yale in 1892. He retired to Scotland 4 years earlier in 1888, leaving Stirling in charge of all his Canadian operations. His grandson, born about that time in 1891, became the 3rd Baron. He was named Donald after his grandfather, but his middle name was Stirling after John Stirling. Stirling was also admired by Baron Mount Stephen, George Stephen, Strathcona's cousin and business partner, who also was president of the Canadian Pacific. But he also retired to Britain in 1888. He had a fishing lodge in Quebec and invited Stirling to use it every summer, which was Stirling's favorite vacation occupation, right? But reports were sent to England on the use of the lodge. And here's one of the things in the report, pictures of salmon caught by Stirling. And in 1915, there was a salmon report, all the different people and how many they caught and what they weighed. So the leader, of course, was Stirling, who caught 27 salmon totaling 544 pounds. Poor Mr. Borden caught only 1. Now, most of the people in this group, like Borden himself, were not in Stirling's generation. They were sons of his friends, so they were people from the next generation. Borden, for example, was a son of Stirling's Yale roommate and fellow Skull and Bones man, the Calico King Matthew C.D. Borden. And here's Borden's plant in Fall River. Another son of Borden was named Matthew Stirling Borden. Now here at the bottom we see substantial catches by James A. Stillman and Percy Aldrich Rockefeller. In 1904, Rockefeller and Stillman's nephew was born and named John Stirling Rockefeller. Sterling died at the fishing lodge in 1918. Here's the New York Times coverage. New York corporation lawyer stricken suddenly at Lord Mount Stephen's castle, trustee of big estates, counsel for National City Bank, great organizer and confidential advisor of financiers. So these three guys from the next generation became trustees of Yale's sterling bequest, these fellow fishermen. Also, not Mr. Bloss, who caught only 3 salmon, but George Church, who was the accountant for Bloss, became senior trustee of the sterling bequest and the spokesman for it. He's the one that came to the dedication of Sterling Chemistry Lab. John Garver, who was a law partner of Sterling, was the counsel for the trustees. James Perkins was the Citibank vice president, as was McRoberts. Stillman was the chair of Citibank. Rockefeller, of course, was a financier. And the other one was George Cortelyou, who was chair of what became Con Edison. He had been Theodore Roosevelt's Treasury Secretary. So these are the guys who approved the spending and the planning for the use of Sterling's bequest, so we owe a great deal to them. Garver and Rockefeller were Yale alumni. Rockefeller, in fact, was in Skull and Bones. But 2 of the others were Harvard alumni, and the other 3 had not gone to college. Let's consider Mr. Bloss here, who didn't make it as a trustee. He was born in 1847, so he was 3 years younger than Sterling. He didn't go to college. He became a cotton broker and president of the New York Cotton Exchange in 1892. He retired at age 51 in 1898. He was referred to as a chum, and he was the housemate of Sterling for more than 45 years. Here's the 1910 U.S. Census report for 912 Fifth Avenue. John Sterling was the head of the household, and James Bloss was listed as friend. He died 7 months after Sterling, so he was unable to serve as a trustee. There's no picture of the 2 of them together. Here are Bloss and Sterling, and you can read a great deal about them in this website, outhistory.org. It's got very complete information about what could be discovered about their relationship. So here's the entrance to Sterling Chemistry Laboratory, and if we peer around behind the pillar on the right, we can see this plaque, building devoted to the encouragement and advancement of the science of chemistry, built and equipped from funds bequeathed to the university by John W. Sterling, class of '64. But on the far wall there, you can see Bertram Borden Boltwood. Now, he was also among the committee chairs for the dedication in 1923. He was 6'4", so you can see him there in the back row. And notice that he was chair of the Committee on Construction of Sterling Laboratories. So he was the guy that did the heavy lifting planning for the building. His father had been Sterling's classmate in Skull and Bones, but he probably knew this because even though his father was born when died when he was only 2 years old, but notice that his middle name was Borden. He was also named for one of the Bones men. So previously, he had been chair of the Committee on Construction of Sloan Physics Laboratory. So doing these 2 buildings took it out of him, and he died in 1927 by his own hand. Here he is earlier, just shortly after he had just shortly after he had graduated. It says he served on the faculty from 1896 to 1927. But in fact, he didn't serve in the period 1900 to 1906 because he had established a consultantship with Joseph Pratt, mining and chemistry consultation. His role was assay and analytical work, separation and purification of metals. Notice that the office was on downtown on Orange Street. But he was present in 1904 when Rutherford gave Yale's Silliman lectures on radioactive transformations. He was very interested in this because of his interest in heavy metals. And their correspondence began, and they collaborated for many years. Here's their collection of their letters on radioactivity. So henceforth he became professor of radiochemistry, first in physics from 1906 to 1918, and then after Stirling's bequest came in. Oh, and notice that in 1907 was his most notable paper, and that will be discussed later in the day by Bob Crabtree. But he came to chemistry in 1918 and until his death in 1927. Now, remember, the Delano and Aldrich had the idea of putting saints and knights along the front of the building. But there are no knights or bishops. There are these plaques, and there's a frieze along the top. Now, if we look at that frieze, at the far left, it starts hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon. So the first and second rows of the periodic tables, and it continues all the way across the front of the building till at the far east end we get the sixth and seventh rows, which were Boltwood's territory, some of which had not yet been discovered. Number 72, hafnium, was discovered the year the building was dedicated. Then there's rhenium that had not been discovered yet. There was astatine. There was RAEM. What is that element? Well, RAEM comes from the fact that this gas came from radium metal. It's radium emanation, now known as radon. Then 87 is francium, 91 protactinium, and finally at the far east end uranium, one of Boltwood's favorites. In 1908, he had a paper on ionium, a new radioactive element, by Bertram Boltwood. Radium came from ionium. Boltwood couldn't separate ionium from thorium, so in fact it turned out to be an isotope of thorium discovered by Boltwood. It was thorium-230. Now, this is the April 1923 dedication. At that time, he still needed to design the honor roll shields across the front of the building. So here you see the people who made it to the photograph. And in the middle, if you look above the door, you can see that Stirling Chemistry Lab erected 1921. Of course, that was the beginning, not the completion. But at the time of the dedication, it wasn't complete. The date had not yet been entered. And the same was true of these plaques along the front. It was decided that the plaques around the outside wall, they would chisel the names of outstanding American contemporary chemists, for example, maybe Neff or Stieglitz. But Boltwood is not in this picture. He may be back in his office trying to figure out what to put on the honor roll shields. He could have put T.W. Richards, who was the first American to get a Nobel Prize from Harvard, who did atomic weights, or G.N. Lewis from Caltech, who did shared pair bonds, or Moses Gomberg from Michigan with his organic free radicals. These were speakers at the dedication. Certainly this guy was thinking about them, because that's William A. Noyce, who was the founding editor of Chem Reviews, who used the lectures from the dedication for the first 2 numbers of Chemical Reviews. But Giuseppe Bruni from Milan, who studied solid solutions and spoke on them, also made a very important comment. An Italian chemist was quite astonished and remarked only the names of dead chemists should be used. So if we look at what was actually put on the plaques, we can see here the original chemists, Boyle, Lavoisier, Dalton, Avogadro, a very distinguished group, and the youngest ones are Fischer, who had just died a few years earlier, and 3 that had not yet died, Arrhenius, Nernst, and Rutherford, Boltwood's friend. Now, how did they make it onto the plaque? They were Chem Nobelists, but so was Richards from Harvard. But they were both chemical Nobelists and had been Silliman lecturers at Yale, so that seems to have been the filter. Now, this is from the forerunner of Chem and Engineering News at the time the building was about to be dedicated. There's a 6-page essay by Boltwood, which is about the function of the building, not about the design of the decoration. He doesn't even mention the architects Delano and Aldrich. But he shows these floor plans of the lower floor and the first floor. So if we look at the floor we're on now, we're in lecture room 110, and at the other end of the hall we have lecture room 160, which is smaller because there's room for a lecture prep where they could fit out lecture demonstrations. And there are these tracks which allow wheeling tables fitted out for the demonstrations into the lecture rooms. So this is the demonstration table railway, and here you can still see the tracks out in the hallway outside our room here. There are the tracks, and on the far side there's a bridge with tracks going along it as well. Now if we go into the center of the building, you'll notice that we have teaching laboratories, elementary and qualitative analysis, but also the industrial chemistry lab, which looked like this. That's where the dedication was, and it's certainly now known as the Vaccaro lab. A floor has been added, right? But if that hadn't been put in, Pat could use this, which is a traveling crane which he could lift his tables around with. Right? If we move past the central hallway into the quantitative laboratory, notice in the middle there was this special fume-free room for the balances, where they could do quantitative analysis of minerals by weighing the sulfides that they had precipitated. And a room on the 3rd floor, isolated from the rest of the building for good reason by an open court, contains the apparatus for generating and storing hydrogen sulfide. The generators of special design intended to supply sufficient gas in one run to fill the oil-sealed gasometer, which has a capacity of 100 cubic feet. From this storage tank, the gas is distributed through pipes to all portions of the building, so hydrogen sulfide was available on tap. Boltwood doesn't comment on 2 belts and suspenders features. They had both gas and electric lights, and both DC and AC wiring. There was also a new and exceedingly satisfactory item among the plumbing fixtures in the steam water mixture, extensively used throughout the various laboratories, which produces a generous flow of hot water of any desired temperature by mixing steam and water. This may sound great, but I can assure you, as someone who used it early in my years here, it really was awful. There was also the sawtooth roof over the center of the building, a further factor of economy and comfort. In addition to the perfection of lighting, which is ideal for laboratory purposes, and notwithstanding the doubts expressed by many skeptics when the building was in the course of erection, the sawtooth roof construction has proved to be a most effective heat insulator. However, it started leaking. In the 1960s, it was covered with some sort of polymer gloop to try to stop the leaks. Then it leaked through the goop. So here's a picture from 1991 of trying to get the water off as it was leaking down into the labs below. So here's John Toscano as a student, now chemistry chair, dean of natural science at Johns Hopkins, and Dan Webster, Sterling Chemistry's last Sterling endowed plumber. Here's Professor Zilm inspecting wiring on the roof in 1991. So over the last 50 years, there have been a lot of repairs and expansion. In the 1930s, the building looked like this, and the area between it and physics was off limits, because until 1942, it was the private driveway to Highwood, the Hill House mansion. Klein Chemistry Lab was built in 1964, and Klein Biology Tower was built on the site of that mansion. When Klein Chemistry was built and connected to Sterling, there were air handling problems.
Come right on ahead and see it. Come right on.
Okay, but don't let the door bang the
Okay,
camera.
right on ahead and see it.
Okay, but don't let the door bang the camera.
Which room is it, Jim? It's the room down there. Which room is it, Jim? It's the flow. It's the room. It's the room down there.
Okay, wait.
It's the flow. It's the room.
Okay, wait.
So the erratic pressure made helium boil off in Jim Prestigar's NMR magnet. And Harry Wasserman's sign warning about hoods not working. And at the back door of KCL, there were problems with pressure. So it wasn't easy to open the door. First you put down the coffee, then you open the door with two hands, and then you can pick up the coffee again and come in. Back in Sterling, in December 2002, we were working in a winter wonderland. But in June 2003, CRB started to be constructed. And by December 2005, you could see the new building and Klein. But the sawtooth roof of Sterling was still covered with goop. In 2013, the building was wrapped like Christo may have done it, for replacing about half the bricks, which allowed us to get up close and personal with some of our favorite elements. And inside was renewed as well as the outside. Fred Ziegler, who taught organic in SCL 110 for many years, saved a chair arm as a souvenir. Here you can see it had been carved. In 2014, these guys, Zilm and Tully, were supervising as the sawtooth was removed. So by the end of September, the center of the building was completely removed to be replaced by the new teaching labs. This was a triumph of Boltwood's adaptable design, who had built the different parts of the building so they could be as flexible as possible. And in August 2016, the new labs were dedicated. And there was a celebration by all, including these guys in the middle, the current chair, a former chair, the chair to be, the president, and the guys who actually get the work done. Down in the lower left corner here we have Ed Ginter, who is the last Sterling carpenter. So this has been the story of SCL. There's also copies of a 2001 chapter about the story of Yale Chemistry Science available. And I want to thank the chemistry chairs and personnel, the presidents and provosts, the class of 54, C. Mail and Klein and the NIH, who built Klein Chemistry, Bertram Boltwood, who was responsible for the building and its flexibility, John William Sterling, of course, who made it all possible, and the Sterling trustees. And thank you for helping us honor SCL.